which began affecting both sides. Inside Alesia, Vercingetorix put his men on reduced rations. Outside, Caesar's supplies dwindled daily. The mathematics were brutal. 50,000 Romans plus 10,000 cavalry meant 60,000 mouths to feed. Even with Germanic foraging, starvation loomed. Then something happened that nobody expected. Caesar's own men began to doubt. Centurions reported murmurs in the ranks. Soldiers understood courage, understood fighting against odds. But voluntarily trapping themselves, building their own prison? Some wondered if their commander had finally gone too far. Caesar responded with typical brilliance. He toured the fortifications personally, speaking to work crews, praising their efforts, explaining his vision. "We're not trapping ourselves," he told them. "We're creating a killing ground where Roman discipline will slaughter Gallic courage." The murmurs stopped. The first outer wall attacks came on day 12. Advanced elements of the relief army, probably scouts testing defenses, hit the contravallation. Just probing attacks, but they revealed the challenge ahead. Romans would need to fight in two directions simultaneously, something no army had ever attempted at this scale. Soldier testimonies from this period, preserved in later accounts, speak of bone-deep fear mixed with strange pride. They were attempting the impossible, building something that would be studied for centuries. One legionary supposedly said, "We're either building our monument or our tomb. Either way, they'll remember us." What the Romans did next was pure, calculated brilliantly. They pre-positioned reserves between the walls, created rapid response protocols, established signal systems using flags and horns. Every contingency was planned. When the storm broke, every man would know his role. On September 20th, as the relief army's dust clouds appeared on the horizon, every Roman knew they had just built their own grave. Dawn of the first day revealed the full magnitude of Caesar's gamble. The relief army spread across the horizon like a dark ocean. 250,000 Gauls. Some reports claimed 300,000, arranged in tribal contingents. The Romans were now outnumbered 7-1, trapped between hammer and anvil. Commius of the Atrebates led the first assault on the outer walls. 40,000 warriors charged the western section, screaming war cries that echoed off the hills. Inside Alesia, Vercingetorix coordinated his attack, sending his men against the inner fortifications. For the first time in history, an army fought a siege in two directions simultaneously. The Roman response demonstrated why they conquered the world. Pre-positioned sentries wheeled into place with mechanical precision. The tower fighting began immediately. Gauls with ladders and grappling hooks trying to scale walls, while Romans stabbed down with pila. But the prepared defences proved their worth. Charging Gauls hit the concealed lily pits, men screaming as sharpened stakes punched through their feet. The stimuli claimed hundreds more, iron spikes tearing through sandals and flesh. But here's where Caesar's madness became genius. The gravestones, those sharpened logs, channeled attacking forces into kill zones. Gauls couldn't charge straight. They had to weave between obstacles. This gave Roman artillery scorpions and ballistae clear targets. Imagine trying to dodge giant arrows while navigating a maze of death traps. The sensory overload was total. Screams came from both directions. Vercingetorix's warriors hitting the inner walls, the relief army assaulting the outer fortifications. Arrows fell like deadly rain, so thick soldiers said the sky darkened. The clash of iron on wood, gladius on shield, created a constant thunder that deafened men for days afterward. By midday, the northwest section was in crisis. Vercingetorix, the Arverni commander, and Vercingetorix's cousin had identified a weak point where the fortifications crossed difficult terrain. He led 60,000 picked warriors against this single section. The Romans there, 2 legions, roughly 10,000, men faced 6-1 odds. Caesar watched from his command position, purple cloak visible to all. He had to make an impossible choice: reinforce the northwest and risk other sections breaking, or trust his men to hold against overwhelming numbers. This is the moment when Caesar earned his legend. He sent only 6,000 reinforcements, just enough to stabilize, not enough to weaken other sectors. The fighting reached inhuman intensity. Romans fought in shifts, fresh sentries rotating in as exhausted men stumbled back. But there were only so many fresh troops. By late afternoon, some sentries had rotated 3 times. Men fought on despite wounds that would normally sideline them. There was nowhere to retreat to. Statistical shock. The Romans were firing 100,000 arrows per hour at peak battle. Every archer had pre-positioned bundles. Slingers added their lead bullets to the storm. The killing ground between obstacles and walls became carpeted with bodies. Wounded Gauls couldn't retreat through the press of men behind them. They died where they fell. Night brought no relief. Gauls lit torches, continuing their assaults in the darkness. Romans fought by feel and sound, stabbing at shapes looming out of blackness. The confusion was total. Friend and foe mingled in the darkness. Men killed their own comrades by mistake. Officers lost control of their units. Only the walls themselves maintained any sense of order. Then physics itself seemed to favor the Romans. The lily pits, invisible in darkness, claimed thousands. Gauls carrying torches made perfect targets for Roman missiles. The stimuli, those iron spikes, were impossible to spot at night. Attacking formations disintegrated as men tried to help wounded comrades. Dawn of Day 2 revealed the carnage. Bodies piled 10 feet high in some sections. The wounded and dying carpeted the ground between walls. But the relief army was far from broken. Fresh contingents moved forward, stepping over their dead comrades. Inside Alesia, Vercingetorix prepared for his all-or-nothing assault. This is where honor met pragmatism, and pragmatism won. Caesar received reports that Labienus's section was about to break. 6 cohorts had been fighting for 20 straight hours. The general himself was wounded, still fighting in the front rank. Without immediate reinforcement, the entire northern section would collapse. Simultaneously, Mark Antony's position came under massive assault. The future triumvir faced 40,000 Gauls with just 6,000 exhausted Romans. Messages begged for reinforcement. Cannot hold much longer. Caesar faced every commander's nightmare 2 crisis points, insufficient reserves to address both. But then something occurred that nobody, not even Caesar, expected. The Germanic cavalry, held in reserve between the walls, took matters into their own hands. Their chieftain, whose name history sadly doesn't record, saw the crisis and acted. Without orders, 4,000 horsemen charged out a rear gate, riding hard around the entire battle to hit the Gauls attacking Labienus from behind. Caesar made his choice. Taking his last reserve, just 13 cohorts, about 6,000 men, he split them. Half went to Antony, half followed him personally to Labienus. But here's the detail that changes everything. Caesar didn't just send reinforcements, he led them himself, purple cloak streaming, clearly visible to every Roman on the walls. The psychological impact was instant. Exhausted legionaries who could barely lift their shields suddenly found new strength. Caesar comes. The cry spread along the walls faster than any messenger. Men who'd been fighting for a day and a night prepared for one more effort. What happened in the next 60 seconds decided Western civilization. 3 forces converged on the northwest section simultaneously. Labienus's exhausted men held the wall. Caesar's reinforcements hit from inside. The Germanic cavalry smashed into the Gallic rear. Caught between 3 forces, pressed against their own obstacles, the Gauls had nowhere to go. The slaughter was absolute. Unable to retreat through the press of their own men, unable to advance through Roman steel, the Gauls died where they stood. The Germanic cavalry, in their element now, cut down fleeing warriors with savage efficiency. These weren't Roman citizens bound by rules. They were paid to kill, and they earned their gold that day. Inside Alesia, Vercingetorix watched his cousin's force disintegrate. He'd launched his own assault, sending every available warrior against the inner walls. For a brief moment, it seemed like the interior might break even as the exterior held. Gallic warriors actually breached the inner wall in 3 places. This is when things went from desperate to impossible. Caesar, still visible in his purple cloak, led a charge that military historians still study. Leaving subordinates to handle the outer battle, he raced to the inner wall. The sight of their commander, personally leading reinforcements, turned the tide. Romans, who'd been falling back, suddenly stood firm. But the Gauls had one advantage Caesar couldn't counter: desperation. They knew this was their last chance. Warriors threw themselves on Roman spears to create gaps for their comrades. Noble cavalry dismounted, preferring to die on foot rather than flee. The fighting reached a crescendo of violence that survivors could barely describe. Then came the moment that would haunt survivors forever. The relief army's main force seeing the northwest attack fail, seeing thousands of their best warriors trapped and dying broke. Not a gradual retreat, not a fighting withdrawal. They simply turned and ran. 200,000 men, fleeing the field, abandoning their trapped comrades. Inside Alesia, from the walls, Vercingetorix saw it happen. The relief army he'd summoned, the force that was supposed to save Gaul, running. His assault on the inner walls faltered as word spread. Warriors who'd been ready to die suddenly lost heart. The greatest army Gaul had ever assembled was melting away like morning mist. Caesar seized the moment. Fresh Germanic cavalry pursued the fleeing Gauls for miles, cutting down stragglers. Roman infantry sorted from the fortifications, adding to the slaughter. What started as a battle became a rout, then a massacre. The killing continued until exhaustion, not mercy, stopped it. As the sun set on the second day, 50,000 Romans had done the impossible. But what happened next would echo through history. Dawn of the third day brought an eerie silence. No war cries, no assault preparations. From Alesia's highest tower, a white flag appeared. After witnessing the relief army's abandonment, after losing thousands of his best warriors, Vercingetorix had called his final council. The Gallic chieftains faced a bitter choice: continue fighting and face starvation, or surrender and hope for terms. Some advocated fighting to the death. Others, more pragmatic, pointed out their families were also trapped in Alesia. The debate raged through the night, but Vercingetorix himself ended it with characteristic nobility. "I united Gaul to fight for freedom," he reportedly said. "I won't let it die for my pride." He would surrender personally, taking full responsibility, hoping Caesar might spare the others. It was the decision of a true leader, sacrificing himself. Story. In just 2 days of fighting, 40,000 Gauls lay dead between the walls. Thousands more died in the pursuit. Roman casualties, while serious, were remarkably light for such a battle. 12,000 wounded, 5,000 dead. The lily pits alone had killed more enemies than many entire battles. The surrender ceremony became legendary. Vercingetorix donned his finest armor, his best weapons, his most decorated horse. He rode out from Alesia's gates alone, approaching Caesar's command position. In full view of both armies, he circled Caesar's chair, once a final moment of Gallic pride, then dismounted and laid his arms at the Romans' feet. Caesar, ever the showman, remained seated throughout. The symbolism was deliberate and crushing, the greatest Gallic warrior submitting to a seated Roman. The man who'd united 40 tribes kneeling before the representative of Roman order. In that moment, independent Gaul died forever. The practical aftermath began immediately. 80,000 warriors filed out of Alesia, laying down their weapons in massive piles. Roman quartermasters catalogued everything: swords, spears, shields, armor. The logistics of disarming so many took 3 full days. Each tribe's warriors were separated, counted, processed like livestock. Here's the detail that changes how you see the entire battle. Caesar's treatment of prisoners depended entirely on politics. Aedui and Arverni warriors from tribes Rome needed as allies were released to return home. But 40,000 others weren't so fortunate. They were distributed among Caesar's legions as slaves, payment for years of hard campaigning. The letters Caesar sent to Rome painted him as the savior of civilization. Gaul was pacified. The barbarian threat ended. Roman values triumphant. Falslasi. Of course, he didn't mention that he'd created the crisis by invading Gaul in the first place. Victory has a way of rewriting history. The soldier celebrations mixed exhausted relief with grim satisfaction. Wine flowed freely. Caesar ensured that men who'd fought for 2 straight days could barely stay awake to enjoy their victory. They'd done the impossible, and they knew it. Veterans would bore their grandchildren with stories of Alesia for decades, but the cost of victory would haunt Caesar forever.